Welcome to Resiliency Within. I am your host, Elaine Miller-Karas, and I am so excited to welcome back my friend and colleague, Bo Dean. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. Welcome, Bo, all the way from North Carolina.
So glad to see you and just be here with you today.
Well, and today we're going to be talking about a subject that's very near and dear to our heart. But before I do that, I want to tell you a little bit about Bo. And he's senior HR analyst for learning and development at New Hanover County Government and a certified community resiliency model teacher educator through the Trauma Resource Institute that I know that many of our listeners know is the nonprofit I started, can't believe it, almost 20 years ago. He designs and delivers learning and development for, approximately 2,000 public employees across 30 departments, always through a trauma-informed nervous system aware lens. So it's been such a great honor for me to meet him and to collaborate with him over the years. And I have to say, I'm very excited because I am going to go to Wilmington in May, and that will be the first time I meet Bo in person. So Bo, you know that I'm excited about that. I'll give
So
you I'll give you a proper hug.
I was about to say we're finally going to actually hug in person rather than virtually, and it's surreal to me because I feel like we've been doing that for so long, but now we're actually going to do it in person. It's really talk about being able to find sensations of positive.
Yeah. Well, and so, Bo and I both, I think it's so interesting because we are both kind of embedded that the two things can be true at once, and what else is true. But I want to just talk a little bit about the show, and then we're going to get right into our discussion. But Bo, um, he's going to share with us his reflections of how the first 2,000 days of life, from pregnancy through early childhood, lay the foundation for resilience across the lifespan. And together, we're going to discuss how these early experiences shape the developing brain, the nervous system, and also our senses of self. We will explore how love and stress can coexist within families and how unspoken trauma can quietly influence a child's development. And drawing from neuroscience and research on adverse child experiences, we're going to examine how early environments shape long term health and well being, and importantly, how resilience can be cultivated. So we have a very hopeful message, I think, don't in
very,
terms of what we talk about, right? So we
very.
we can be in loving relationships with people, but also experience suffering. Both things can be true. So, Bo, as we get started today, what is on your mind? And then we'll get into some of our questions and your reflections.
Well, it's interesting. Today is Maundy Thursday in my religion and in my practice, and I always take this day off. And I started doing this years ago when I sort of, after all these years of growing up in a church, I'm half Presbyterian, half Episcopal, and I think I was predestined to be Episcopal. And for those of you who know the religion, you know that that was a really bad joke. But anyway, but I never really got it. And we did this Maundy Thursday dinner in my parish here. It's called Church of the Servant. And in the dinner, there was a tenebrae kind of thing where the lights would go out throughout the dinner, but it was a real celebration. And towards the end of the night, it got really dark and it got really quiet. And there was a moment of understanding where this was leading to, where this was leading to the betrayal, the arrest, all that kind of good stuff. But before that happened, I looked across the room, and when I got to the dinner that night, I didn't understand what was happening. There were these places set up throughout the room where there were these foot washing stations. Now, in the Presbyterian Church, we didn't wash feet, and I looked across the room, and there was my priest, who I adored. Father Joe was just lovely, but he was a little bit particular. Let's just put it that way. And I looked across the room, and there is Father Joe on his knees
Mm.
washing the feet. And I'd just gotten elected to vestry, and so I knew some inside information. And he's washing the feet of a woman that I knew he could not stand. She drove him crazy. And he is, with tears in his eyes, washing her feet. And I got to tell you, I sat there dumbfounded and with tears in my eyes. And this is long before Krim and all this stuff. And I'm just thinking, what in the world is going on?
Mhm.
And it really hit me what this was about. And as we're doing scripture and we're talking about the stories, It was at that dinner that there was the washing of the feet, and that was a position of servitude. And here, this person who is going to go through this crucifixion and this betrayal and all this stuff, who we exemplify in the religion as the one that's going to go through this, washed people's feet. And I'm thinking about, as I'm coming, that just never resonated. That was never a part of what I learned. We didn't get on our knees. We didn't think about that in that sense. Two things can be true, right? We didn't hear those stories. There were not a lot of that. But it was also about the way we connect with each other, the way we think about each other, the compassion, the love. What is it that lives it? What lived in my body coming up, and then how does it start to tell these stories now? And I'll never forget that. So today, as I'm going through today,
Mhm.
I'm connecting with you,
Yeah.
and what, and I'm not trying to be overly, connecting, but it's true. What Crim brought me, what this biological resilience brought me, was this idea that connection, that coming to each other, that humbling to a certain extent, realizing that these bodies are perfectly and wonderfully made, but there's a lot living in them. And
Yes.
it doesn't matter if we're disconnected in, like, we don't like each other necessarily or whatever. What matters is that in any circumstance, whether what's going on, we got war going on in the world, we got stress going on in the world, etc., we can regulate towards each other in a way that allow us to find peace and connection and all this kind of good stuff.
And to be
And
present with one another
we can be
oftentimes.
present, yes.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so, but where did that come from? Well, interestingly enough, my mom was a director of maternal and child health for the state. And she had been trying to explain to me all my life that if we were working on creating the best circumstance for mothers when they had children, those children were going to have a better opportunity in life. Now that makes sense to me. And it wasn't until I got into being in CRIM, when I got into the community resilience model, where we started hearing about Nadine Burke-Harris and all the research around ACEs, adverse child experiences, et cetera, where it started to come together that the better off we are with prenatal care. And I know this is all going around, but it comes together for me now that after since 2018, when you came and brought this to us here in this county, it's all coming together, that it's not only what we're doing now, it's what we're doing when people are starting to think about having children. But then when the children are born, what is the connection? So here's all that said, what's in my brain right now. We have a community resilience model trainer here who's one of my dear heroes, who's also a minister, who went to a 2,000-day conference of ministers. And he was blown away because the research around the first 2,000 days of a child's life are the most formative for their brain development. So, what happens in those first 2,000 days can really determine so much of how they develop. And I'm thinking, wow, that's power, right? So, he came back to Wilmington. His name is Clifford Barnett. He's amazing.
I
But
know Clifford
I know you do. I
Barnett.
know,
I
right?
love him. Yes.
So he came back and he said, every year from now on, I'm going to have a conference of faith leaders, community, whatever, and we're going to talk about what are we doing in our communities to make sure that every child in those first 2,000 days has what they need. Now, it's a big, lofty goal, but let's have the conversation. Well, he called me in December, and as Cliff does, as you know, he called me and he left me a voicemail at Christmas that said, "You are now my keynote speaker for this conference. Have a nice day. Love you, and God will." Click,
Which
click.
you said to me, and I said, you got to come on the show and talk about what we talked about at that conference. So that's how you got here today, because
Thank
I
you.
want you to do some of that, because this is what this whole, but I want to just say one thing for people that don't know, many people who listen know about CRIM and the community resiliency model. For those of you that may be new listeners, the community resiliency model is a set of very simple
Thank
six
you.
wellness skills that help us understand the nervous system. I'm starting to call it body literacy. If we can be literate about
Yes.
our bodies, right, and know the difference between and learn the difference between sensations of distress and well-being and shift our attention to well-being, guess what happens? It's like planting a beautiful seed. It grows into well-being. The more we cultivate it, the more it expands and grows. I think that Bo Dean just said some beautiful things about what the understanding, Bo, of what this nervous system does for us.
That's
So
right.
if you're all interested, you could, our sponsor, the Trauma Resource Institute, traumaresourceinstitute.com. If you just go to their website, you learn all about it. But we also have a free app called I Chill. It's now in many languages, Bo. We expanded the languages. It's in English, Spanish, Ukrainian, Arabic, Hebrew, Chinese, Korean, and soon to have Portuguese and Creole. And we're working on Japanese and Hindi and also Farsi. So we're expanding so that people all over the world can learn about these wellness skills that help our nervous systems to help
I
us be
love it.
present in ourselves and, of course, with others. Because one of the things we're learning when we have a regulated nervous system, one regulated nervous system helps another. And so there is this wonderful feedback loop that happens that the more that we're in those places of well-being, and think about what we're talking about today. If the parent can be in their zone of well-being, their resilient zone, when they're taking care of their new little babies, how is that going to impact that growing development of that child's brain?
That's right.
So these are very important components of what we'll be talking about today. So let's loop back, Bo, to here you are.
No,
You're asked to do this keynote presentation by our dear friend, Reverend Barnett, and here you are going to be presenting about adverse childhood experiences and how we cultivate well-being in
well,
families.
I was dumbfounded because I was like, he's got to know something I don't. I mean, he sees something in me that I don't, and I love that about him. He does that. And so what I did was I went immediately into kind of a meditation about, where do I show up in this? And I do. So there's two things. With what we're trained in with the community resilience model, for those of you that will be interested in it, what's powerful about that is that we're not neurobiologists. We're doing wellness, right? We're helping people navigate learning about those skills, things like that. But part of what the Trauma Resource Institute has given us is this opportunity to look at the brain, is to look at what's the science behind this, because this is efficacious. This is not something that just came out of the sky and we pulled it, and there's so much research. I mean, when we're looking at what goes behind this with Van der Kolk or Borges or all these different researchers, and what Elaine has done in her own work with Linda Gravey from Emory University, and all these different people that have come together, and this has been done across the world. And I'm not trying to sell anybody on anything. This has been now over 8 years of my experience of just connecting with people. So I'm looking at all this, but then Nadine Burke-Harris was just one of my heroes in looking at this and seeing how, as we are developing, what's happening in our environments lives in our bodies, and what's not resolved in our body has to be resolved. So it's going to live some way, right? And so I've learned this. Well, so I'm thinking about it, and I'm thinking about my own experience. And in this room that I'm sitting in right now, I'm one of those people that keeps a lot of history in our family. You see a lot of pictures, and the pictures are of this 1966 baby. I know y'all are shocked. Take a minute. It's pretty good, but
1966, baby. Okay, there you go.
but I was born in '66, and the pictures look great, right? There's this, they got a brand new house. We had ponies in the yard, and all of that was true. There was so much love, but at the same time, there was alcoholism. There were unfortunately there was not necessarily the most true to the relationships. There was some severe issues with epigenetics when you come to some on one side of the family, tenant farmers and poverty and shame. Oh my God, the South. Hello, shame shows up so much. Eating disorders, health issues, all of those things were true as well, but we couldn't. That's where we don't talk about things. And so as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about, as I'm a baby, what are the messages? What are the things that I'm hearing, and what am I receiving as I sit in that church pew, as I sit in those communities? And then my parents divorce when I'm 4, and I start living two very distinct different lives. One is when I go home on the weekends into that world that was sort of that upper middle class southern rural world, and then my mother, who gave us this incredible experience living in Chapel Hill, where she was going through a whole new culture. All of that is living in my development as I'm coming up. Well, if that's true for me, then take that experience and bring it into the world of someone who is living an experience of someone of a different race, someone who's living in a different experience with their economics, living in. So you just keep expanding this out. So all that intersectionality that goes into that, how does that work on the development of that person as they're coming up? But again, going back to what if the love wasn't even there when that person was developed? What if before even as that person was being developed, there was prenatal drug use or alcohol abuse or something like that? So as I'm thinking about this, let's talk about what do communities have to be doing to making sure that every child has what they need. And that's what I love about the community resilience model. And I'm not saying this is the cure all for everything, but
Yeah.
how do we show up as communities to say, all right, we're going to take some things, some practices, some skills, some opportunities to see each other, to show up for each other, to acknowledge each other. And it's this perfectly and wonderfully made thing that we have right here in our bodies that can make that connection. It's a beginning to connect, right?
Well, and I
And
think the other thing, if I could just,
oh yeah, please. I'm sorry, I get excited.
I know you excited is that because, I think, I often, I mean, I think I even have a slide to this effect. You've seen it, Bo, is that oftentimes as humans, people ask us, well, what do you think about this? What do you feel about this? Which of course are very valid, our emotional state, our cognitions, but no one says, well, what are you sensing right now? That's something that we're trying to cultivate all over the world because our sensations often direct our actions. Like wherever you are in the world, like it's raining today in California where I live. So if I go out and I don't have a raincoat on, I'm going to get drenched. So
That's
what
right.
I did when I went on my walk, I went back inside and I got a little raincoat so I could get covered up. So that was because the sensation of being wet was not comfortable. And so then I took an action. So I think this is one of the really important elements is that when we bring the sensory piece into our vocabulary and we start noticing those sensations and how many of us have had I just had a gut feeling that I shouldn't do something. But oftentimes we override our gut feeling. Have you ever done that, Bo?
Oh,
And then
100%.
and then we're going, oh my gosh, I should have trusted my gut and done something differently. And I think what we're trying to do is be the whole person, which I think
Right.
is also what you're saying about the early childhood development, that if we can help people understand the importance of those first two, well, it's important for all childhood, but when the brain is in those vulnerable states in the very beginning, it is so essentially important to know this. But I also want to say something about thank you for sharing your personal journey because it's clear to me, and knowing you that you are a very loving person.
Thank
And
you.
so that you received love in your life, but you
Mhm.
also received other things in your life that you weren't looking for that also impacted you. I have to say that, my experience is similar in my own journey, but yet we have, what have we both done? We've leaned into how do we cultivate well-being? How do we spread hope? How do we work with people in a way that people see their best selves, even when sometimes we are all on our knees? We started out by thinking about the minister, the priest washing the feet in the replication, right, of the Last Supper. And I think about the incredible humility that is really embedded not only in Christianity, but also we just had Passover, right, in many of the face of our world that have to do with being humble. And
Right.
I think that humility connected to understanding sometimes can lead us on roads and journeys that bring us into, like you're saying, how do we help our community from our place of humility and understanding change what may be happening to our very dear little precious ones, our
Right.
babies? Yeah. So back over to you, Bo, in terms
No.
of maybe talking a little bit about, you mentioned adverse childhood experiences. So what does that have to do with the brain development and what you've understood it to be? Because also I want you all to understand too, as you're listening, Bo's not a neuroscientist. He's a person that's involved with people. And that what we've learned is that our natural leaders can be great ambassadors in terms of helping people understand about their nervous system to spread wellness from the sensory perspective. So
Right.
anyway, over to you.
Absolutely. So it was power for me to understand that as I'm developing, I mean, first of all, that this that's up here is developing over the course of my lifetime. First of all, that this brain can change all the way through my life. But the most important period, this development is happening pretty much from 1 to 18, and for boys we're a little bit beyond that. And actually that even becomes more important because I'm very involved in the criminal justice arena, and we can talk about that another time. But as we're developing, what goes on in our environment, what goes on in our bodies really does affect that development. And so what I loved, and I have another story where when I was 18 and I got a diagnosis when I was at that time, Kaiser Permanente was very involved in my life. But in 1997, they were doing some studies around what, and this is where y'all taught us. And this is where we learned from Nadine Burke-Harris when she took this a little bit further. But Dr. Franklin, all these folks were looking at what is it that these first 10 things, then they called them adverse child experiences, what is that having to do in terms of the effect on the development of a child? And they asked people, and what I loved about this study was that the majority of people in this study were white, they had insurance. And think about it, if you had insurance back in 97, you were pretty privileged because not many, that's not a that's a pretty big deal, right?
And they lived in San Diego, California, one of the most beautiful
Hello, hello.
places in the United States, right?
So they asked them, and what they found was if they had two or more, several of these adverse child experiences, whether it was incarceration, a parent that was incarcerated, a divorce, if there was abuse in the house, it was one or more of these adverse experiences going on, there was a direct correlation between that and outcomes in health later in life. But here's the thing that was really powerful. Adversity's not destiny. If they had had some kind of intervention going on in their life at that time. Prime example, sitting right here, right? I had 5 ACEs in my life. I had 5 adverse child experiences, yet somewhere in my life, I have had a positive adult, and I've had that experience in my life that have helped change some of the course of the direction of my life. But there still is this correlation between these adverse experiences and these health outcomes later. But what's the power, right? If you know this, if you can identify this, if you can see this, number one, you can start working on it earlier. But then you can also see that you can build in things that can help people when you start identifying this later. Y'all, that's public health. That's power, right? And then as we're walking through this, we can start using those 6 wellness skills that we're talking about to then connect, help each other, navigate. And we talk a lot about the resilient zone. The resilient zone is not this, oh, I got unicorns and rainbows coming out my rear end. No. It's about being able to navigate, charge and release, be able to stay in this zone so that I'm not bumped up. Y'all, years ago, I would get bumped up so high, my heart rate would stay like elevated. I would stay so tense. My body would ache. I'd have back pains. I would have heart issues. I am more able today, no matter what, whether I'm on hurricane duty or whether I'm dealing, whatever, to be able to do this, to go up and down, because I'll use a resource, I'll navigate to it. I'll connect with somebody. I'll go for a walk. That's power. But think about a parent who gets this skill, who's having to deal with not being able to afford a home, who's having to deal with losing a job, so they get these skills, and instead of it becoming abuse or incarceration, or I'm not saying it's going to prevent everything, but there's a lot of power if we as communities are using these things to build that connection and to allow this to become part of the conversation. Okay, I know we're going to have
So,
to go to a break
yeah,
in a
we're going to
second.
take a little break, and I'm probably going to have to do part 2 of this, I think, today as we're talking about this. But I think the other thing I just want to mention as you're talking about before the break is, we just had two of the nurse midwives from the Atlanta Birth Center.
Oh,
Uh,
awesome.
yes, and they have integrated CRIM and they did a pilot study. And think about it, they're pregnant and also parenting and how helpful the community resiliency model skills are to the point that they want to, how do we spread this throughout the whole US? And I'm going to try to see if I can get them to be on the show. They can talk about that too, because it's directly connected. As you know, this is kind of one of the outcomes of learning about regulating the nervous system, of how people think creatively. Yes, this is true. We have a terrible infant mortality rate in our country, especially the
Right.
Black infant mortality rate. And what can we do to help it? So when we come back from the break, we'll continue this discussion and talk a little bit more about some of the strategies specifically that help reduce the effects of adverse childhood experiences. So we'll be back in just a few moments.
Thank you.
Welcome back. This is Elaine Miller-Karas. I'm having a wonderful conversation with my dear friend and colleague, Bodine. We're talking about a subject that's very dear to both of us, which is how do we reduce the impacts of adverse childhood experiences? Bo just shared with us, you had five, I had four adverse childhood experiences. So we know that both of us are at greater risk for developing different conditions in our life as a result of it. And I think one of the things that when I first read about adverse childhood experiences, what really stuck with me is if you had six or more, you were something like 4,200 times greater chance of developing an addiction to a drug or alcohol compared to
Mhm.
those who had zero. And
Right.
I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this, like you said, this is a public health emergency. But so, what are some of the things that mitigate, that reduce the impacts of adverse childhood experiences? Because we're talking about both things being true, right? So please, over to you, Bo.
Well, and one of the partners we have here in New Hanover County, and I think there's across the country, is communities and schools. That's a program that is nationwide, and I'm very happy that some of the best funders in the country that are private funders get in there and do grants. I know the Melinda Gates Foundation has done a really great job of that. But here's the thing: it's putting people in schools, and Reverend Barnett, who we mentioned before, he's in front of a school in his neighborhood every morning, and all he's doing is welcoming these children in. So they see a positive adult every morning. And a lot of these kids, it's a Title I school, meaning that they're free and reduced lunch, and there's a lot of poverty in the neighborhood. But they're seeing a positive male role model every morning as they walk into school. He's not preaching at them. He's not telling them something. He's just saying, "Good morning, I love you." Right? That's power. I got to tell you, when my mom was going through, she was a single mom. We were probably the first generation of latchkey kids in my entire family. I had a crossing guard. I'll never forget this woman for the rest of my life. She was joy every morning. That brought me a sense of peace and comfort and safety if we're teaching kids safety. So there's communities and schools. Then you've got Smart Start. So you've got a program that has to be funded. I mean, if we're electing people that say they're against Smart Start, I'm not getting political on your show, but this is a program that's pre-K, right? This is where we're getting in and we're working with families that are really having to work and take care of themselves, but they're taking care of the kids. So there's some strategies there. But then you're looking at public health institutes or institutions in the counties and across the country that are looking at prenatal and postnatal care and hospital systems that are addressing the inequities. I'm the chair of the governance committee, I mean the health disparities committee for a 42 county organization called Trillium that looks at Medicaid dispersal. And I'm telling you, the disparities are there for women of color when it comes to maternal care. The hospital systems, if you're not with the right hospital system, the hospital systems don't have equitable, not equal, but equitable care for women of color. The data's there. It's not something I'm making up. So we've got to be addressing some of those issues. If a woman of color tells you what she's experiencing, we've got to show up and believe her. And that's the kind of thing. And that gets to the children themselves. So when the children are saying, "Hey, I've got an issue. I'm behaving in a way." I'll never forget this. We were doing some early training years ago, and children were wearing the hoodies, and they were saying, "Well, that's just bad behavior. They've got to show up right." Well, that was safety. That was protection for those kids.
Mhm.
No, no, no. You got to show up and find out what's going on with these kids, what's happening for them. And I'll never forget, and I know I've talked too much, Elaine, but I'll
Yeah.
never forget when I first became a county employee. I went on an experience with one of our school nurses, and I said, "What's this?" And she had a supply of uh, uh, protein bars and things like that in her office that she bought. I said, "Why are you doing that?" She said, "Because when the kids were showing up in this school, that they were behaving poorly and they were being sent directly to their classroom. Well, what was happening by going directly to their classroom was they weren't getting a hot breakfast. They were getting muffins and sugar and all this kind of stuff to control their behavior. That was
Mm,
just making it worse because
mhm.
the cold stuff was sugary and not good for them. So by 10 o'clock in the morning, she could set her watch by it. They'd end up in her office because they had sore stomachs or they were acting out because of the sugar. So the new superintendent, who I adored, was paying attention and said, no, 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 we're going to fix this. They're going to get a hot breakfast, and we're going to work on taking care of them because they're coming out of households that don't necessarily have this kind of structure."
Well, and I think
Now,
it's important to know that there's food insecurity all over our country, all over our world.
that
That's
was the
right.
issue.
Yes, that
Yeah,
they didn't have the food to give to their children.
that's
And
right.
so when I hear there goes, oh, every child will have a hot breakfast at school, and not to cut programs like that, because that may be the most
Yes,
nourishing meal that child has for the day.
yep,
So we have to pay attention to that, and also our public figures, our politicians who are supporting these programs
yes,
that help our children thrive, because not everybody is born in middle and upper middle class families. And sadly, the disparity in our economic system is becoming more apparent every single day.
that's right. And abuse is not determined by your zip code. So that's the other thing is the biases. It's like, oh, well, I know that this is going on because that neighborhood. Okay, let's just stop. I have been now around for 12 years around law enforcement, et cetera. Zip codes do not determine. Now, it can exacerbate based on the stresses, but it is not determined by zip code about abuse. So the other thing is the strategies have to be around taking biases off to let people stop being so protective of their own determinations based on race, color, gender, zip code, etc., and say, "Whoa, we're gonna look at the realities of us being human." And that came from my own. That's where my keynote speech was. Two things can be true. I can have the pony that's on my wall right here. I can have love, true. I mean, I think about my grandmothers and my dad and all. There was true, wonderful intention and love, but there was a lot of other stuff too, y'all. And so if I'm sitting in a church pew and I've got a leader sitting up there who's not going to listen and is going to look down from that pew, whether it's a minister, a rabbi, or if it's a DA or whoever, who says, "I base this based on what I know of your showing up in your social world," not on the reality of what we're doing, we're never going to get past this stuff. And
Mhm.
that's where we need to have these honest conversations. I don't have to tell you every detail. I don't have to go out here and reveal everything, but I do have to be able to show up as a whole person and our whole selves. And I think that's where the recovery community, they always talk about recovery. So I can't remember the saying, but in churches, the recovery community tends to be in a basement, and then there's stuff going on in the top of the church, and
Yes.
there's a lot of churches that talk about, I wish we could go in the basement, because in the basement, recovery communities, they're trying to stay alive, and there's a talk about, they're going to talk about everything to be able to stay alive, whereas upstairs, a lot of times it's performative. It's not, and I'm not saying that for everybody, so please nobody start writing me letters, but but I think upstairs we're not sharing and connecting as much.
So,
So
so it really sounds like what you're talking about too is that we need to have public policy, but we also need to have people that are working on the ground floor
yes,
saying things, how can I help you? What can
yes,
I do
yes,
for you?
yes,
And
and
I
that's
think
not, and that was
top
not meant as a judgment. Yes,
right, top down and bottom up. We often say that about just learning about the nervous system, right? If we're only thinking cognitively and not thinking about our nervous system, that we're missing a
right.
piece there. But it needs to have both. But I want to say a few more things about the adverse child experiences. When I first read the work of Dr. Christina Bethel from John Hopkins,
Yes,
yes, and look at you get so excited too, because she talked about, she wanted to, she herself had a lot of ACEs. And she talks about, I've often mentioned this, I think of Mrs. Raccoon, they used to call her, in her tenement housing in Los Angeles. And this Mrs. Raccoon would have a birthday party every week for all the kids whose birthdays were
uh,
in that month or that week. And but children who never had a party had a party.
yeah,
And that was one of the things that she listed as one of the things that was nourishing for her.
yeah,
So when we talk about this, it also can be small acts that you do in your neighborhood.
love that.
We talk about Reverend Barnett going and greeting the children at the school. I had a show a couple years back of my two best friends from high school, Marianne Tamillo Cooey and Katie O'Neill Arkin, and we met when we were 14. I just met them last week for dinner when I was up in the Bay Area of California. And it's like no years have passed, but more than 50 years have passed since we first met, right? And when we were talking, and we've talked about this frequently, having those relationships, two friends in high school that I knew cared for me, also mitigated the adverse child experiences I was
Absolutely.
with a dad who had a problem with alcohol, a mom who many times was emotionally abusive. And we also realized that one of the homes, Marianne's parents' home, was a safe home for us. They showed love and kindness to us, and they weren't fighting, and that was a respite. And both Katie and I had different experiences. And Marianne said, I didn't realize my home was a respite for you. I mean, we weren't thinking about it at the time, right? I just knew I was attracted to that. And
Yeah,
my mother was from a different country and was very strict. And what we talked about was Marianne's mother would call my mother and say, "It's okay, Elsie, to let Elaine do that. It's something we do in America." And so that her mother mitigated some of the adverse child experiences that I would have had if it wasn't for those adults also and friends that helped me.
absolutely.
So I want to just bring that too, that yes, it is social policy. It is, do we have something that's changed systems? Because it has to be both. But don't forget about those small acts of kindness towards
Absolutely.
that can make such a huge difference.
Absolutely. It's such a power, and when you all gave us, and I said you all, and I know we're on your show here, and you're sponsored by Trauma Resource Institute. And by the way, I try never use acronyms when I'm talking to audiences. I always say what they are. But the first definition, and I don't remember things rote; they just become part of me. But it becomes community, and I get back to, and that becomes the power of it, right? It's at every level, and I see. So I work for New Hanover County, and it's a wonderful place, but it's got a very storied history. People started coming here as colonizers in 1600s, and but it had an indigenous population that had lived here for thousands of years. So there's a lot of different complexities and things that go into this place, but it's extraordinary. But we also have some of the very deep traumatic incidents that happened here. We're the only place in this country where there was an actual coup that took place where persons of color were removed from office and white people were put in. And that still lives very much in the bones of what goes on in this area. So there's a lot that happens here. But here's the thing, my county manager and leaders, when I brought the idea of, and I had Amy Reed and I had Robin Johnson all sitting in the room. But as a person that does learning and development, when we all got inspired by Mike Sapp and that whole group, when they came here after our hurricane, and we brought this forward to county management, said yes. And I think that becomes part of the story. When someone is finally willing to navigate somewhere inside of themselves, no matter what their biases are, no matter what it is that has experienced for themselves, and they're able to say yes to letting something else in, that's where it begins. And if it can begin, then we're able to start doing something different. And I'm not blowing sunshine at you, Elaine, but
Well,
but
and I want
but
to
you
say something about this, this story, because the way that we got to New Hanover County was Carrie Sipp, who was
absolutely.
ACES Connection, knew me and called me. I was actually
That's right.
in Raleigh at the time doing a crim teacher training. And she said, Elaine, this hurricane has devastated us. Will you talk to some community leaders? That was before I became a Zoom person, is that we ended up doing I don't know what platform we used, but I was actually left that training and did an hour presentation. Drew Pledger, who who is our
Yep.
like was our man in North Carolina for Try, still is. And Kevin McLeod was taking the training. I said, Kevin, why don't you come and you can see what we do? Kevin McLeod now is who works for us, and he's been with us for 5 years. I just think that that was so pivotal that day because they were both with me, and we did the hour presentation because I had to go someplace, to, I guess, to use their technology. But who was on that call? Mebane Boyd was on
Hey,
that call.
boy. That's right.
Mebane Boyd said, we need this. And then later they found money through a community foundation to bring our team in. So I want you all to hear that it is about connecting the dots of
Right.
people that you know, and not to feel overcome by how big it seems, because sometimes it's just knowing that right person that sparks something that changes the trajectory of a whole county. So anyway, I
Right.
wanted to add that piece of it because I always have
100%.
gratitude to Carrie, who also lives in your neck of the woods, that I also have never met in person, that I'm going to meet in May, and I can't wait. So anyway, so continue, Bo, continue.
Oh, and by the way, it's like bringing the mother goddess into our world. We are so there will be royal. I mean, forget
Okay.
the
Oh
forget
my
this
gosh.
forget
Stop,
this
stop, stop.
forget this British people coming to town. We got Elaine. But anyway, so but yeah, so but it's saying yes, and that can be such a powerful risk for a lot of people. And I get that. So that makes sense to me. I grew up in this stuff. I get it. But once you say yes, oh my God, the things that can happen. And my whole life has been watching people say yes. I will never give up on that till the day I leave this planet. And I'm going to promise you that when I leave here, I'm going to get a bargain with whoever that I can come back and keep bugging people. So you're not getting rid
I'm
of me.
sure there are going
Like
to be signs everywhere, Bo. There's going
it
to
will
be a
be. Yes,
butterfly that comes in when someone's
that's
saying
right.
something that's not, oh, I think that's Bo again, coming and giving us a message. But
But
well, let's talk a little bit about, I want to also acknowledge that not only you, but so many people in New Hanover County have really created a resiliency network. I know
yes.
Jay Cuba, I mean, you mentioned Amy Reed and Kelly. I mean, there's so many people. But can you just say a little bit about what kind of award did you all get for creating this resilient community that you're talking about?
So with the county itself, so county government, we were honored by the National Association of Counties organization. It's called NACO. And NACO really saw that we were nominated for what we did with county employees because it became what we did with it was not only did we train all county employees, and we're continuing to do that. So this has become an onboarding piece. So if you come to New Hanover County, and I talked to Kay, who leads training and development for TRI. I want to build something with TRI about making this about professional development. Because yes, you need to learn about the skills, but I want understanding of people to say, if you're teaching somebody, I don't care what you're teaching, building in these skills is essential. Because if I want to connect with somebody, getting them into their cognitive space. So let's say this is your brain, right? You want to get them into their highest order of connection. And that's the top of your brain. That's their cognitive space. But a
Well,
lot of
for
times,
those that are listening, because our Voice America audience don't see the video.
oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so basically what you're saying is he's using his hand to as a replica of our brain. So go ahead.
So, and you want them to be in the most connections possible. But a lot of times we're living in our emotional state because we've got so much stress, distraction. Lord knows our phone, all that stuff pulling us away. So using these skills. So what we do now is if I'm doing emotional intelligence, project management, I don't care what the class is. We open with a 1 to 10. How are you today? Sense in, get us, track into your body. Where are you showing up right now? And then I'm going to give a number. Are you a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? And then you raise your hand. But as you're doing that, look around you. See where other people are in the room. We're not fixing this. We're just connecting with each other. And then maybe throughout the class, check in with each other, kind of get us in. Anyway, we do that. We're also on the tables in every session we do now. There's a basket. It has fidget, psychological mental health tools. It has pins. It has things to write on, whatever someone might need to navigate to help them adjust their nervous system. We also have what's called Help Now, which is one of the skills that gives you easy go-to things that you can use to reset your brain. Taking a sip, getting up and stretching, doing things that can help you reset. That becomes integrated into everything we're doing. That's what we did in the county. Well, we told NACO about it, and they were like, brilliant. Because with all the things that are pulling on firefighters, tax people, DSS, et cetera, how do you get them to be present in a meeting? How do you get them to be present when they're in front of a client? And in the world today where people are mad as they can be at government, how do you help them navigate to help serve, wash their feet? How do you get them to be with them? And then for the person doing the serving, how do you get them so they're not going home at night and taking a drink because they're trying to just relax or stop their divorce or have a health issue? There's a lot to this that becomes part of integrating. And I don't care if you're government or if you're in banking or if you're in any, this will work for anybody. So that's what I want to talk about there. But in the networks in town, Coastal Horizon, largest footprint of mental health and substance use disorder treatment in the area, they picked up this and gave it trainers. So Amy Reed, she left me, but she loves her. She and Kelly Purcell now do this throughout communities. So they not only got grants, but Coastal Horizon said, we're going to do this because we know if we're going to do substance use and mental health treatment, we've got to have this as a key component. So that became that. Trillium, which I'm on the governing board of, that they got 14 people trained throughout the 42 counties. That then went into one community, which is an outreach program from Trillium. It started to get bigger. Then we have the New Hanover kind of Resilience Task Force with Jay Vinay coming as a succession from Tina and Mebane that now has like I think 4 dozen collaborative partners that are now networked that this now starts to reach out to religious, non-religious, nonprofit, for-profit. Everybody's connected, and Jay Vinay just got a grant from our community foundation to underpin that, and she's coming out with a program that will help to train those nonprofits and then to develop even further out. And finally, what's happening, oh, I'm so excited, and this is why Elaine's coming to town, is our university that's kind of had a little footprint, handprint here and there, is coming together and going to unify under our new health. And there's so much happening at our university here that I really can't speak about yet, but there's so much going on that because of this, it's going to get even larger. So
Well,
It's
So I want to
powerful.
just say, as you've kind of shown us how that little seed that was planted with Carrie Sipp, how many years ago, has now spread with people who are, you really infuse the skills of the community resiliency model, and there's been a shift that also, caused you to be recognized by this National Council of Counties, but that you're continuing. And I just want to loop back. We just have a couple minutes left, is that all this matters to our little babies that are born in New
100%.
in New Hanover County. Because what happens when the adults are regulated, when, maybe the mom is taking a wellness class through the county because she works there as a receptionist, but she knows the skills. And now she has this little baby in her arms and she's going, oh my God, the baby's driving me crazy. But I know how to stay in my zone of well-being, my resilient zone. So I'm going to just comfort my baby, or maybe I need to put the baby down in their crib so I can calm myself down and then go back in a few minutes to help the baby regulate their nervous systems.
That's
So
right.
this is all interrelated, because when we have this infused in a community, it's not only for the program that's in perinatal care, which of course is essential, it's for everyone.
That's
And
right.
now have a more regulated entire community. Not to say it's perfect, of course, but what you're telling us is the infusion is possible. And what if we could create all over the country, all over the world, what you have created, what all of you have created in New Hanover County? That to me is the hope. But we've got just a couple of minutes left, Bo, and I want you to have the final words of what you want to leave our audience with today.
Well, I go back to that image of because it is this day. It goes back to that image of that. There was a monk 37 years ago, and I have an anniversary tomorrow, and I remember him always. And he said, "True humility is the achievement of one's own excellence." And I was 22 when he told me that, and it took me a while to figure out what he meant. There's some excellence that lives in every one of us, and I've been finding more and more of it. But that also means that there's some things that lie outside of me, and I need people. We all need each other, and so I'm so incredibly grateful that I have found you, Elaine, that I found us, but I find each other each day, and it's because of this that children are going to be better when we find each other in these positive ways, and that's what it's all about. But it's also that humility, because I realize I can't do it all and there's no one that can do it all, and that keeps us connected. And so thank you for letting me just share some time with you, and I can't wait to hug because I love you very
I
much.
know, I'm
I
so
really
glad.
do.
May's going to be here in just a few moments, actually. It seems like the time is like quicksand in my hands right now. But I just want to, end by any of you who have been listening today and you've had your share of adverse child experiences and maybe you've never heard of it before, to know that there's really good help available too. And that, to reach out to, your local mental health system. You can also reach out to the traumaresourceinstitute.com. And we have many offerings, things that are free that you can do online that can help you learn about the community resiliency model. And remember the iChill app. It's free. If you have a smartphone, you can access it. But let's say you don't have a smartphone, you can go to ichillapp.com and you can listen to it through a computer. So there's many ways to do this, but also to remember, all of you, what else is true. You may have had suffering that many of us have experienced. Bo certainly has. I have. I don't think we get out of this life without suffering, but there's also people that sometimes have helped us. And maybe think about that. Maybe it was a school teacher. Maybe there was some person that reached out and said the kindest thing to you. Or maybe there was such an act of generosity that you didn't even know that was possible, that someone gave you something, or you gave something to someone and you demonstrated that generosity. We know that helps us be better people on the planet. So remember what else is true in your own life. And until next week, this is Elaine Miller-Karas, thanking Bo Dean deeply for being here. Thank you, Bo.
Love
And
you.
also, thank you. Anything else, Bo, you want to say? You can get well, I've got 30 seconds.
Nope.
Okay.
Just
All
love
right.
you, and I'll see you soon.
Okay. See you soon. And to the rest of our community, see you next week.